Do you keep getting told that your thesis or dissertation project is too big? Do you ever feel like your project's topic is easy to see in your mind, but almost impossible to detail to another person? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we're going to talk about the difference between an interesting idea and a sustainable research project. You'll hear practical ways to think about projects that can actually be completed with the time, skills, and access that you have now. So, let's dive in. So back whenever I was a doctoral student and I was working on my dissertation project, it seemed like it was always a struggle between me and my advisor to try to figure out what was my project, what was doable, and what was something that was interesting to me, but also enough in their wheelhouse that they felt like they had enough ownership that they would be interested in working with me about. And so you're always trying to navigate a whole bunch of stuff whenever you're working with your advisor and with your committee, deciding what it is that you want to choose your research topic on for your dissertation or your thesis project. And I just remember every time that I would come up to my advisor and have a new idea, I'd go on for a while talking about it, and he would just stop me in the middle of it and say, "That's too big. Nope, it's too big. It's taking you too long to explain. It's too big. Try again, try again, try again." And it took a long time before I figured out what a manageable dissertation project was. So whether you're working on a thesis or a dissertation, that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how to select a topic in a way that is original, interesting to you, and overall that is doable in the time frame that you have, so that way you can get done, get out, and get on to the next part of your life. So let's dive in.
Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's Big Idea.
So before I get into the common pitfalls that I think that a lot of thesis and dissertation writers fall into, I want to address what I think is one of the overall problems with choosing a topic for your thesis or your dissertation. And that is, I think for a lot of us, whether you're a master's student and you think this is the end of my educational journey, and so I want to go out with a bang, or I'm a doctoral student and I'm doing my dissertation and I want to enter into my field with a bang. Either way, there seems to be a lot of pressure to do something that is way above and beyond what you've done for class projects or research projects that you may have worked with your advisor or other faculty, that you feel this pressure to really go way above and beyond the normal level of writing that you're used to. And as a result, you end up biting off way more than you can chew. And so as the project goes on and on and on, it feels like the end of that project never seems to get any closer, because at this point you really haven't built up the stamina for writing 100, 200, 300 pages, that you become more and more despondent, more and more depressed, anxious, insecure about your ideas, and it just ends up causing you eventually to implode. And I've seen that happen dozens of times with my own students, students in my program, students in other programs. It's a very common issue with thesis and dissertation writers. Now, I will say that if you have picked a good advisor, and if you want to know more about that, listen to the previous episode. But if you've picked a good advisor, your advisor should know enough at this point of thesis and dissertation writing to steer you into the direction where you have a manageable, doable, finishable project. But that is not always the case. Advisors are people like anyone else. Some are good, some are bad. And so, just the quality of advice can vary. It could be that you get someone who has an axe to grind, or they themselves want to have success vicariously through you. So they're going to make you do a whole bunch of stuff that you really shouldn't have to do in order to get your thesis or your dissertation done. Some advisors, I hate to say this, but some advisors really do kind of just get off on the petty power of having another person's career or educational trajectory at their fingertips, and they just try to screw with you. So all that is to say that your thesis or your dissertation advisor or chair can be a huge part of the problem whenever it comes to picking a topic. But what is going to really set you apart from other students and also help protect yourself in those instances is having a very clear idea of what you want your topic to be and how you're going to pursue that topic over the course of the chapters in your dissertation. So let's first identify some common pitfalls to the process of picking a good topic before we dive into some of the more beneficial strategies. So first off, the first pitfall that I typically see, and this one is, it's hard to get mad at because especially if you're the advisor, students, they can just be so darn cute sometimes. And so it's hard to get mad at them whenever they fall into this pitfall, which is over curiosity, right? They're really excited by this idea. They're going to be able to choose this topic, choose a population, choose an idea that they wouldn't have done otherwise for just a class project or a project they might work with outside of coursework. And so this over curiosity sometimes gets young writers into a trap because they want to do all the things. Well, you can't do all the things, obviously. You don't have enough time for that. If you're doing a thesis, if you're in a 2-year program, then you should be approaching your advisor or thesis chair at the end of your second semester, working on it over the summer, developing it over the course of the next 2 semesters, and finishing in the spring. That's an incredibly condensed timeline for you to get all that stuff done. If you're working on a dissertation, obviously you have longer, but then the expectations are also higher. So again, you think you have more time, but every year that you take for your dissertation is a year that you may not be eligible for a tenure track or full-time position, or even if you are eligible, that you're losing out in your applications to other people who have PhDs in hand. All of these things are compounding themselves because you're a curious person, which is great, but your curiosity is getting you into trouble now, and you're trying to do too much. So that's the first problem. Second one that I oftentimes see is that a lot of people choose topics out of a sense of an inferiority complex, and as a result, self-sabotage as they pursue an idea that they think is going to prove to everyone how smart they are. I'm going to access a population that no one else has done. I'm going to have a research design that is overly complicated. It doesn't matter what it is, but there's this impetus to do more than what is required of you in order for you to impress other people because you have this sense of insecurity and inferiority. Your dissertation is not the place to do that. Your reputation is going to be developed over the course of your entire scholastic lifetime. As we move forward, I find that dissertations become less and less important as documents in and of themselves in terms of their scholarly contribution. More and more, those documents aren't even really looked at until they're either turned into a book or they're developed into articles. But for the most part, a dissertation is not a place where you are making a big splash in your discipline. That comes afterwards. So your dissertation is a place for you to get done. It is not the place that you want to try to find some sort of balm for all the times that people slighted you intellectually over the course of your life. The last pitfall that I oftentimes see is that people choose topics out of a place of unsurety. And so how this manifests most often is that a student says, I'm unsure about what it is that I want to do, so I'm just going to pick a whole bunch of stuff. Sometimes they do that out of a sense of, I'm going to pick a whole bunch of stuff and my advisor is going to tell me what it is that I need to do. So my advisor then is going to condense my work, or they pick it without that sort of intent, but it's just, I don't really know what it means to do a thesis. I don't really know what it means to do a dissertation. So I'm just going to do all the things. I'm going to throw all the spaghetti at the wall, hope something sticks, and that someone finds it impressive. And there's a few problems with this. Obviously, the first one is that you have all of these ideas in the hope that your advisor is going to help you cut them down. Maybe your advisor is not well trained enough to know how to help you do that. So they end up just looking at you and going, yeah, okay, do all the things. And so now you're slogging through a huge project. You have no end in sight. And your advisor's like, well, you chose it. It's your fault, not mine. You'll get done whenever you do or won't, not my problem. And so, you really can't come from a place of unsurety in this, right? Over the course of your time in your master's or doctoral program, you should have been developing precisely what it is that you want to study and the topic that you want to have, so that way you can have a level of specificity that's beneficial to you. I would say as you're thinking about your topics, before you're even thinking about the content of your idea, you need to be asking yourself a few questions. The first is, what's your timeline, and can it be done in the timeline that you have? If you're a master's student, you have maybe a little bit more than one school year to get it done. But as you're doing that, you're probably also taking coursework. You may have an assistantship. You're trying to develop yourself to either have a job or go into a PhD. Like, you got a lot of stuff going on besides just the thesis. And if you're a doctoral student, you have all those things too. And you're also trying to find find a job at the end of this. Recognizing what your timeline is and then working backwards from that is incredibly important. The other thing that you need to think about is, are any of my ideas here requiring some sort of heroic effort, in doing this heroic effort, that in and of itself becomes the argument for the importance of my dissertation or my thesis. So if my approach to this is I'm going to have a literature review that's so long, or I'm going to have 100 interviews, or I'm going to do a mixed method design, or I'm going to have like this convoluted experimental design, or any of those things, like if you're thinking to yourself, this component of my dissertation, that's the thing that if I put all of my eggs in that basket, that's going to be the thing that makes an argument for my project, then it's a bad project, because what might happen is you'll end up doing too much work and taking too long to get it finished, or maybe something goes awry, your experiment doesn't work out, or your interview data doesn't turn out the way that you want it to, or 101 other things might happen. And so now you put all your eggs in the basket of this thing being the important contribution, and now it's toast, right? What's most important, again, is that you are choosing a topic that can be feasibly done in the time that you have been allotted. So then how do we do that? How do we find a topic that is doable and helpful for us as we're moving through this process? I think overall what I would say is that the most important thing in choosing a topic, and I think this goes with whatever discipline that you're a part of, is that what you're really trying to work at here is, what is the output that I want to have post-dissertation? And I say that because, as I was saying before, I think a lot of times the thesis or dissertation itself is not the most important document. It's important that you get it done, obviously, but it in and of itself is not the scholarly content to your discipline. Most dissertations never get cited, they never get read. There's the old joke that if you take your dissertation, get it published, put a $100 bill in the middle of it, and then put it in your library, come back 30 years later, the $100 bill will still be there. And that's pretty true. Most dissertations are not read. Most dissertations are not cited. The thesis or dissertation is not the place that you're making your scholarly contribution. So instead of thinking to yourself, how can I write the perfect dissertation? What you should be thinking of is, how can I find a topic that lends itself to something post-dissertation? And there's some ways that you can do this. First off, are you in a discipline that writes articles, or are you in a discipline that writes books based on your dissertation? Because that is going to be one of the main differentiators in how you want to approach your dissertation. Now, let me just say real quick, I know that there are some places that like you write articles first and then that becomes your dissertation. If that's the case, then a lot of this advice is going to be moot for you, because you've already quote unquote written your dissertation by publishing articles. Whatever, that's cool, right? But in this case, we're really focusing on the thesis or dissertation coming first. So if you are writing an article style dissertation, there are two different ways that you can approach that. The first one is that your dissertation topic is one that lends itself to your approach, which is to say, in the first approach, if you're doing more social science or natural science type of work, then you have your opening chapter, which is your introduction. You have your literature review chapter, that's your second one. Method chapter is your third one. And then you will have a series of chapters, sometimes just one, but maybe multiple ones, that are findings that answer each one of your hypotheses or research questions, and then a final conclusion chapter. Each one of your findings chapters, because those are answering different hypotheses or research questions, then become a self-contained article that you've written. The other way that you can do it is to write it just like you would an article, right? So you have a literature review, method, findings, all that stuff just done 5 times for 5 different chapters. But either way, what you're really looking forward to here is developing a topic that is able to be developed into multiple articles at the end of your dissertation, because that's the thing that people are going to read and cite. So it's important then that as an article-driven piece, that either you have one clear overarching research question or research purpose that's being addressed in multiple findings chapters, or that you have multiple chapters addressing separate questions, but there doesn't necessarily need to be a coherent overarching logic to your piece, because you're going to be breaking it up anyway into these articles. The other way of approaching a dissertation is to write it in a more book-friendly format. In that case, your chapter is going to develop a background in your chapter 1. Your chapter 2 then is going to be more about developing an argument for what's gone on before and how you are fitting into that conversation. And then your successive chapters going to be you making your contribution, whether that's a philosophical or sociological or whatever it might be, contribution to the topic that you're trying to study. So here, it's important to approach this as you're telling a coherent story across all of your chapters, culminating into your final chapter, which has those big takeaways, but that what you're not doing is thinking about breaking this up into different articles, but instead it's one overarching project. And so I think that as you're choosing your topic, you should be thinking to yourself, how do I avoid those pitfalls? How do I make sure that I'm not coming from a place of over curiosity, of inferiority, and choosing topics that aren't going to serve me and aren't doable, and instead thinking to myself, how can I choose a topic that is able to be published? How do I choose a topic that sets me up with a foundation to have publishable work post-dissertation or post-thesis? At the end of the day, it's really important to remember that a done dissertation is a good dissertation. You've probably heard that a million times, but it really is true that all too often students get into a place of thinking that their dissertation or thesis has to be way more convoluted and complicated than it really has to be. And so as you're working through this process, here are some things that might give you some red flags if you're picking a wrong topic. So first, if you find yourself in a state where every time that you're going back to talk to your advisor about your project, you're always telling them, oh, I had this idea and I'm going to add this new methodological design, or, oh, I had this really cool idea, I'm going to bring in this new theory. That's a problem, man. Don't do that. Stay the course. If you have something that comes up and you're like, oh man, that's a really cool idea, I should track that down. That is the siren call of shiny ideas trying to take you off the path that you have chosen for yourself. Stay true to your goal. Don't try to add new things. Stick with the topic, and as long as it's interesting, it doesn't have to be exciting, but as long as it's interesting, you will get done. The second thing is if you find yourself talking with your advisor, talking with folks, and you can't explain your dissertation project in a single sentence or 2 sentences, it's too big. You need to make sure that you have enough of a handle on your project that you can describe it adequately to someone very briefly. I oftentimes tell people, and I've said this in previous episodes, that you should be thinking of what is the method, what is the theory, what is the phenomenon under investigation. Those are the 3 things. So you should be able to say something like, I'm interested in interviewing students about how they make requests for their instructors to change their grades using politeness theory. There you go. Interviews are my method, students making requests is my phenomenon, and politeness theory is my theory. It's as easy as that, right? If you're able to have that level of conciseness to your project, then it makes it really easy for you to stay true to your goal and to get your dissertation done. The final red flag that I have whenever I'm talking with students who are thesis or dissertation writers that I often see is that they'll start to describe their project, and then after a while, they're either looking for reassurance and that they have the right topic and that I am supposed to be the one who narrows it down for them or validates it for them in some way, or they sort of self-undermine themselves, and they'll start to self-undermine themselves and talk about their theory section, for example, and be like, okay, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but also like I'm just still trying to figure it out, or, oh, this was my methodological choice, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, but, I'm not quite sure about it. You should not be doing any writing on your dissertation if you have not figured out what your topic is and mapped that out with your advisor and have a very clear step-by-step process by which you're going to pursue that project. You don't have enough time, and especially if you are a doctoral student and you're completing your dissertation so that way you can move on and get a job hopefully at the end of all of this, you don't have the resources to limp this thing along for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You should be creating a clear roadmap for yourself based on the topic that you have and figuring out what is going to make you interested in the thing that you are writing that's going to continue to keep you engaged with it, something that is doable, that can be mapped clearly across the different chapters of your dissertation, and that the thing that you are creating has a clear goal beyond the dissertation. Because again, the dissertation itself is not the goal here. The goal is something beyond it. Once you're done with the dissertation, you then have months or years to develop those ideas further, refine them, submit them to journals, submit them to publication for a book, whatever it might be. But you can't do any of that if you don't have your degree in hand. So it's more important for you to have the foundation of those things there in your dissertation or in your thesis rather than for you to feel like you have to have it all perfect. Overall, I think it's just important to keep in mind that your thesis or dissertation is the platform, it's the foundation for your next steps in your career, whether that's the next steps in your educational career as a master's student transitioning to a doctoral student, or in your professional career pursuing employment after your master's or your doctoral program. But whatever it might be, your dissertation or your thesis is not the be-all, end-all. It is a document that you conduct to demonstrate to other people that you have the capability of contributing to your area of investigation over the course of your lifetime. And so approaching it as a foundation, as a platform, rather than as the apex or pinnacle of your scholarly contributions, I think will help you reframe and get away from those negative pitfalls in order for you to be successful. So I think that's going to about wrap it up for me, folks. This is the second episode in a 10-part series about writing your thesis or dissertation. If you found it helpful, please feel free to give me a shout out. I'd appreciate you giving me a 5-star rating or even just sending me something on LinkedIn or my email telling me that you liked the episode. If there's something that you want me to address specifically about the dissertation or thesis process, by all means, reach out to me. Let me know. I want to make sure that this podcast is as helpful as possible for folks as they're going through these projects. I remember them being incredibly stressful for myself. And so it's important to me that you're getting information that helps you navigate that process, get done, and get your work into the hands of people who are going to read it and appreciate it. Okay, so thank you so much, and I will see you in next week's episode.
Hey, co-authors, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.